Being a Jew, awesome. Managing personal finances, not so awesome. Welcome to Kosher Money. And just like that, an entire season of Kosher Money is in the books. Zevi, did you think we would receive as much engagement as we did?
No. And sorry, it's not anything against you and Yaakov, because I know you guys are amazing. But if I'm being honest with you, I was your first guest in the first episode.
That's right.
And looking back, I don't know that I would have been your first guest in your first episode if I would have realized the how many people would listen to it. And that's just me personally, talking about that. But I really, it's blown my mind how many listeners and how many people have engaged and how many people have given feedback. It's really been something. I thought that we really made a difference quicker than I thought we were going to.
And you're being humble. The first episode was really great. It set the table for what we wanted to do here. I have pages and pages of tips and ideas and thoughts about guests we should bring on, topics we should cover. And I've told people, we're going to get to it, right? We can't get to everything in 9 episodes. This is going to be episode 10 and put a nice bow on season 1. But yeah, I think we're just scratching the surface, right? If you had to take a quick number, how many Orthodox Jews is this relevant to, and how many people have we hit?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'm always curious about how many Orthodox Jews there are in the world. They actually just did a census. I think they said there's 15.2 million Jews in the world. And I think maybe 10-15% Orthodox, something like that, 1.5 million. A lot of them live in Israel, where obviously the financial system is dramatically different. But if the numbers are real, let's say about 750,000 Orthodox Jews outside of Israel. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say maybe 500,000 or so that should be listening to this, including kids. Mm-hmm. You can't see them in the video now, but we actually have kids that are our audience.
That's right.
For this episode, and these are kids that have listened to the episodes with their father.
Right.
And so I think that it's actually really it's relevant to a lot of people, and that's the feedback that we've been getting. And I think it bears mentioning. We've had about 100,000 listens, and between YouTube and iTunes and Spotify to these episodes, and that is, if you would have told me that before our first episode, I wouldn't have believed it.
It's wild. So we wanted to have you come down. He drove in from Baltimore just a few days here before Yom Kippur 2021. And we wanted to just go through the episodes one by one, talk about what stood out to us, possible questions that people sent in. We're not going to be able to get to everything. Right. There was a ton of feedback. I mean, we probably can just do a recap episode for 120 minutes on tuition.
Right.
I think we struck a chord there, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, that was, yes.
Okay, so let's start. One of our first episodes was actually with Naftali Horowitz. Naftali Horowitz has a great book. I bought it. It's called You Revealed. And you have some videos coming out that will support that through Living Smarter Jewish, where we got a ton of questions after that episode. How do I invest? How do I open an IRA? How do I think about risk? I need to buy a home. Should I be investing? Should I be spending? Can I get Naftali Horowitz's cell phone number? No, you can't. Let's start with this one. He had said, or Naftali Horowitz said on his episode, that if you're going to invest $50,000 and you give that money over to some financial advisor, he can't be good, right? Someone who does this well needs to spend $1 million. I think it was Ellie Freed who took umbrage with that statement.
Good word.
Yes, Yaakov, you know that word? We're going to bring in Yaakov from behind the camera here.
Harry Potter.
Yes, right. Close. That we'll take that. But yeah, he said that if you have, and many people do, they do, as much struggles as people have. There are many that do have a good amount of money in the bank, and they want to know how and where to invest it. Is that true, right? We had a back and forth. What's the overall thought there?
Yeah, so I'm not qualified to answer the question. Investments is not my specialty. But just to clarify, what people sort of took umbrage with, and it was one of those that really did generate some controversy. So Naftali said that, look, anybody who will talk to you for $50,000 or $100,000 can't possibly be good. And, there's Ellie Fried, who's somebody in Lakewood who I strongly recommend people, look up. I think it's Moolah Maven, he calls himself, and Gelt Guide. He has a website with a lot of valuable things there. He said, it's just not fair. He said that, there are people who will talk to you, at $250,000, $500,000. And it ended up getting, where he posted on LinkedIn and a lot of people had feedback. And we ended up putting Ellie in touch with Naftali, and they spoke it out. And I think what actually came out of that was something really valuable. And hopefully we'll talk a little bit more about Living Smarter Jewish throughout the episode and how we've sort of reformulated a lot of what we wanted to do as an organization because of the feedback from Kosher Money. But one of the things that we're doing is, when you work with these financial advisors, very often there's a percentage off the top that they're going to be taking to work with you. And one of the things that we're doing as part of Living Smarter Jewish that came out from this particular argument or discussion about the value of financial advisors is we're getting a group of what Naftali is vetting as good financial advisors that are going to be working with people not for a percentage of their total overall amount that they're investing, but for, let's say, $250 an hour or $200 an hour, which sometimes all you need is just a few hours to get set up with an IRA, to get set up with an investment strategy. If you have $50,000 or $100,000 as a young couple, you don't necessarily need a financial advisor at 1% or 1.5%, whatever it is. And we're going to be setting people up at $200 an hour, a few hours, get your IRA opened, get your, whatever it is, set up your investment strategy, invest, and then come back every 6 months, a year, and have a conversation. And that, I think, is going to be a huge chesed and will be valuable to people. But you're right, that was definitely one of the controversies from Naftali's episode.
I love that. And people would probably be more open to it, knowing that going in, their total cost here is $400 versus the unknown 1%. And
exactly.
Even though had they hooked up with a financial advisor and given them $50,000, $75,000, I spoke to someone, he invested, I think, about $75,000 over the last 3 years, and I asked him to ask his financial advisor how much he's up to. He said it's now at 110.
Right. So
he's beaten inflation. He's done well, but going in, had he known that, hey, there was an option through Living Smarter Jewish that he can spend a total of $400 and get to where he needs to go, because there's not a lot of, Naftali always says that there's not a lot of, you set it and forget it. You don't have to be involved on a day-to-day basis if you're not stock trading. So that's very interesting. Ellie Fried also pointed out, because Rebbe Hauer, who was in episode 2, and we'll get back to the investment side of things, but Rebbe Hauer and Rebbe Naftali Horowitz had a little bit of different thoughts about living within means, right?
Yeah.
Take us through that.
Yeah, so this was a bit of a controversy, and I actually called Rebbe Hauer and Naftali Horowitz on my way down from Baltimore just to get both of their feedback in terms of how they actually feel and how they wanted this to be represented. But basically, Rebbe Hauer's when Rebbe Hauer came on episode 3, he basically laid out something which he said before, and I've heard him say it before, so it wasn't controversial to me. But I remember even at the time you were surprised with how he said it. And he basically said, listen, it's not the obligation of wealthy people to dial back. Well, there's nowhere in the Torah that says that people who are making a lot of money can't live within their means. It's an obligation on the rest of Klal Yisrael to also live within their means, period, full stop. Is it an opportunity for wealthy people to make a chasana that's maybe not as extravagant as they could otherwise afford, to set out a great example for Klal Yisrael? Sure, beautiful. Is it an opportunity that they should take advantage of? Yes. Absolutely. And meanwhile, Naftali Horowitz has kind of made it his thing over the last, number of years, where he said, listen, this is something which is an active problem, which is causing huge issues where people are constantly getting put into uncomfortable situations where they feel like they have to do certain things in order to keep up with the cones, which is an expression that you've used multiple times on the podcast. And he feels like it's an active problem which is causing a lot of harm, which we need to stop now. Now, actually, they're not really disagreeing. Like Naftali Horowitz said on the way, he's like, I also wouldn't use the word obligation. He said, I would use the word achrayus, meaning it's a lowercase r.
Hebrew term.
It's a lowercase r responsibility. It's something that people need to take seriously. But it's like, it's not a halachic obligation. Rebbe Hauer's right. It's not a halachic obligation. And I think with the point Rebbe Hauer, when I spoke to him on the way down, the point he made is, look, we're past the point as a community where we can make takanas and we can legislate things. Mm-hmm. He's like, Rabbanim aren't, it's not effective for us to be legislating because we don't have the type of enforcement mechanisms that we used to when the Gemara talked about making simple funerals with pine boxes. That was something that the Gemara could legislate as a takana, and the rest of, and and we're still doing it now, 1,800 years later.
Right.
He said, we just can't do that anymore.
Right. Another piece that Reb Naftali got into was side hustles. He wasn't a believer in that. He said that focus is super important, and when someone's starting out, you don't generally see them making it big after focusing on 4 different things from the start. What are your thoughts there? What do people say?
Yeah. So the comments that you got, and again, I think a lot of this is not so much my thoughts as just trying to distill the comments that we got and try to come up with like a reasonable approach.
That was a disclaimer for all those listening. He doesn't want you to think that. And we got a ton of comments on this one.
We did. Yeah. No, a lot of people called in and said, I have a side hustle. Right? What's wrong? You're telling me that I have a side hustle. I'm selling on Amazon and I'm pulling in 15 grand a month.
It was a meaningful side. Like for some, it was a legitimate second job that was pulling in.
Even guys call us. I'm in Colo and I'm selling on Amazon at night. You're telling me that I'm not focusing on my learning during the day because I'm selling on Amazon at night, making 15 grand a month or whatever it is.
I'm just gonna chime in. Zevi has like 17 side hustles. He's gonna hate that I'm saying that.
Yaakov, we're turning off his mic.
Yeah. Organizations you're involved. So you yourself personally maybe could have taken some umbrage.
Umbrage?
Using the word.
Am I not using?
No,
that's nice how you like incorporating sophisticated and picking that up right away.
His mic off.
Yeah.
But there are meaningful monies coming in that are making a difference in people's lives.
So I think it really boils down to what Naftali is saying is if you're trying to get something off the ground, if you're a doctor and you're spending your nights selling on Amazon, maybe not the best idea. But at the end of the day, if you have the capacity to do something and give equal focus to multiple things because you're a person who has that ability to split focus, then there may be value there. I think it comes down to the person and what it is.
There was a conversation we had with Rabbi Hauer about moving out of town, if that's a viable option for people. And I think Stacy Zrian from Achiezer in episode 9. It's just very interesting to hear people's opinions, right? Like you said in episode 1, there's no one size fits all. And we saw that throughout the season where you had difference of opinions, right? Is moving out of town a real option for people who financially aren't making it in town?
Yeah. So again, this was where you really had Rebbe Hauer and Stacy kind of took different tacks on this one. Rebbe Hauer's feeling was that not only is moving out of town sort of an option for people who can't make it, he went out of his way to say it's not for people who are not matzliach in town should move out of town. Rebbe Hauer said, no, people should view out of town as an option for people to really make a difference. You move out of town, you become a valuable part of a small community. You know, there's a real opportunity to make a difference there. People should look at moving out of town as a lichatchila. And when I remember you put the question to Stacy, Stacy's like, unless you have another compelling reason to be moving out of town, don't just move out of town to try to make it work financially. In other words, she was really kind of hesitant on the whole idea. And, you know, that's, I don't know, obviously it really depends on the person, but, you know, it's funny. I was speaking to an executive director of a very large Brooklyn yeshiva, probably one of the largest. And he said that there is a huge attrition in Brooklyn right now. I mean, he said like it's very statistically meaningful to the point where it's affecting their budget because they're having a lot less students. And it's something that we're seeing happen because of really, you know, because of COVID. And we're seeing it happen in the non-Jewish world. We're seeing it happen in the Jewish world where people are moving out of town to Florida, to Texas, to, you know, it's even the same states in the Jewish world and the non-Jewish world. Maybe not Wyoming. I don't know. Do you know of anybody moving to Wyoming?
Yaakov, you have Nebraska, right? There's Denby's in Omaha. Yeah, but I've seen that in Brooklyn. I know one particular yeshiva where they used to have 3 parallel classes, and a lot of their student body moved to Toms River, Jackson, and they're down to 2.
So I don't know. Is Lakewood considered out of town? I don't think we get to say that anymore. I think we're going to get ourselves in trouble.
We spoke about that with Rebbe Hauer.
But what was interesting is that, you know, Yaakov had jumped in on that podcast, and I thought it was actually an interesting point. So Yaakov mentioned that he and his friends were considering sort of different communities, not out of town, like still, I don't know, it's 5 towns, but like Oceanside.
Right. Yaakov, pull up a seat. Grab the camera.
Marville. I don't know
People,
these.
I'm going to come in, but like, this is Ellie's podcast. I'm just
Malvern was that area.
Merrick. Yeah, what were you going to say about it?
No, I just thought it was really interesting that you kind of are looking at a hybrid solution, because one of the biggest things that sort of causes people to want to move out of town is the cost of housing in the tri-state area is intense. Mm-hmm. It's really, really high. And so, you know, Yaakov was saying, well, I still want the benefits of living in town, right? I want the benefits. I want to be able to send my kid to Darche, Tag, whatever the local five towns, high quality yeshivas are. I don't necessarily want to move out of town and be a pioneer, but at the same time I can't afford the housing costs. Are there sort of local institution or local communities where we could lower our cost of living from a housing perspective, but still get all the benefits of living in town?
Yeah, no, it's very black and white when people like think of where they're gonna live, because there's certain personalities that are born out of town and they're like, yeah, I would love to move out of town. I love trying new things. And then there's the type of person, let's say like me, who's born in town and I can't fathom it to a fault of like living in Wyoming or Omaha, Nebraska, or even Florida. So like I think that most people are kind of in between of like, okay, I could hack not living in Manhattan, but I also can't hack living so out of where I grew up, which it's definitely a negative thing, but at the same time, that's just the reality of a lot of people my age, or a lot of people in this position of like, I need to find something in town, kind of out of it. And yeah, we're still searching. And
how's that going?
It's hard because there's always issues. Either a place is too far from the schooling system, or the taxes are very high, at least in this part of Long Island, or the houses are just very small. So when you have all of that, you're trying to compete with the places that are already established, and the prices are high, but they do have a lot of shuls, a lot of mikvahs, close proximity to groceries. So it's not easy, but the general sense that I get is a lot of people get a lot of relief when they hear at least me expressing this, because so many people have this issue of like, where are we going to live?
You think a part of you's coming to the realization that it's so hard to build something new? Like you look at Cincinnati, it's taken a lot of good people to help fund that and make it a reality, where if you just fall back on what's most convenient, you look at an option that is built up, whether it's on Long Island.
It's convenient because it's already established, but it's inconvenient because it's so expensive.
Right.
So it's like, I don't know if it's really more convenient. I kind of do wish that
Sounds like you're moving to Toms River, by the way. Just putting it out there.
A brother of ours, Yitzi,
Yes.
moved to Toms River. He actually lived in Long Island, and they decided.
Which I think is kind of cool. Like he moved from Flatbush. He was renting there. He moved to Cedarhurst, tried it out for a year. It wasn't the right fit. And then he picked up and moved to Toms River, which is kind of cool because people think that they moved someplace, their kids are still young, they're married into that location. Yeah. If it's not a good fit, you pick up, you try somewhere else, and they love Toms River now.
Amazing.
Yeah.
No, look, the opportunities because of COVID of people being able to work remotely have made all of this suddenly it's on the table for 30% of Klal Yisrael, whereas 2 years ago, like this wasn't even a conversation. Like you made a joke to Rabbi Hauer, like, yeah, like we're going to move to Kansas, and Rabbi Hauer's like, what are you talking about? There's a great community in Kansas.
Right.
You just need to get to know it better.
Right.
And so suddenly these are options that are on the table, and that's why it's important that we're having these conversations. Because it could very well be that one of the solutions to this entire issue that we're addressing is for people to move out of town. And what's involved in that?
Right.
And what do they need to know?
That's interesting. You talk about like a single solution to everything we're discussing is where you live.
Well, listen, you just mentioned Cincinnati, right?
Yeah.
Ohio has tuition vouchers.
Right.
Like the OU and the Aguda have worked on that. They've gotten it. They passed it through the thing. Tuition vouchers. Tuition in Columbus, right, is sponsored. A large part of tuition in Columbus is sponsored by the Ohio government and one local family who underwrites a lot of the schools. So tuition is extremely low. So you move to Columbus, you can buy a house for $450,000 in Columbus, what you could buy for $1.5 million here.
Sure.
You're not paying much tuition. State taxes are lower, right? You're 75% home. And
Right.
no pun intended, like in terms of getting to where you need to get to. So there are some people, like Yaakov was looking at this going, yeah, great, I'm not moving to Columbus.
Right.
But for some people, for those people that are on the fence and are able to do it and able to make it work, like we're sitting here talking about how to lower tuition in a local yeshiva here from $17,000 to $15,000. Okay, so it helps a little bit.
Right.
But
Right.
We need to have on like a really Brooklyn-y person who moved out of state
Yeah.
and to like vouch and like, I'm telling you, you could do it. Like, I'll hold your hand. That's what
Yeah,
I
no,
would
I
love to
got it.
hear.
I got
do you know any really Brooklyn-y people?
I don't know if that
I
example
think, I think you should move out of town and then
And
come
be the
back in a
example.
year. That's right.
Yeah.
And you could be a pioneer.
Yeah.
And we can record it live, see how, you vlog it.
That's a separate podcast, by the way.
Yes, Living L'Chaim.
Yaakov's journey out of town.
Yeah,
gosh.
and Living L'Chaim, who's Yaakov really done something cool with that platform, and I know he has a couple of other podcasts that are going to be created, which I think will help even Kosher Money, because it's going to open up everything we're doing to a whole new subset of people. But let's talk about that. So we spoke about tuition with Reb Heshi Glass, and Reb Heshi has a lot of experience in the out-of-town communities where they do have government grants and lower costs, and it's a little bit different than the ones or the schools in town, right? The cost of living, the tuition, everything is different depending on where you live. Let's start with this, Evie. The cost of tuition depending on where you live. What are the numbers?
Yeah, so this is really important. And just a preface to the whole tuition thing. So, we got a lot of feedback on every episode. I think on every episode we got feedback about tuition. Like it was like, let's talk about life insurance. Okay, but I'm going to tell you about my tuition issues, right?
Right.
Like, and when people gave feedback about tuition, it wasn't like a 30-second voice note. It was like a 6-minute voice note with the story of my life and every opinion that I have. And it all, like, a lot of people said, they said, this is our conversation every Friday night in our house around the table. Like every time we have guests, we're talking about tuition. Every time, like, my in-laws come, we're talking about tuition because it's so personal to people and they feel so strongly about it because it's something that they're living with, and it's something that affects what they do. It affects their parnasa. It affects whether their wife works. It affects, their kids come home from yeshiva and they're thrilled with their kids' chinuch, but they still feel like this is something that they're living with every day. And so the emotions that episode, that all the episodes brought out, but the emotions that episode brought out, it was like, I remember you just kept saying throughout the episode, we're going to do more. Like, I promise you, we're going to do more. Like, we're coming back. Like, not all of we're not addressing everything, right? And so that it needs to be said, like, that is so, it was overwhelming, I think, to all of us, just the avalanche of feedback that we got on that particular episode. Okay, to address the question, so this is also really important. We were talking about, just a second ago, we were talking about out of town. I think it's really important to understand the dynamics of tuition are so different by community and by school. And I think it's important for people to go in with their eyes wide open, that it's not a fair question to say, well, why in Lakewood are they paying $6,000, but in the 5 towns we're paying, $22,000 for Halb, or $28,000 for Hafter, or $17,000 for Darche. Right? Every one of these schools, like Rabbi Glass.
I love how he knows numbers, by the way.
How does he know?
Just to keep going. Before you get into this, tell me, Flatbush, Brooklyn, what's the cost of tuition
Brooklyn
there?
is basically between 8 and 11,000, depending on the school and depending on how old your kid is.
Florida.
8 and 12,000.
What about Florida?
So Florida now is actually it's changing quickly, because I think the school in Florida, the main school in South Florida, right, is, I don't remember the name of the school, Torres Emes or something like that. So it's very interesting. I don't know exactly what their tuition numbers are, but what's really interesting is that their enrollment at their school has gone up from, I think, 1,000 kids to 1,300 kids or whatever in the last year. So they're having to, like, frantically build out and try to accommodate the influx of people that are moving to North Miami Beach, to Miami Beach, to Boca, and to all these kids, to all these parents who suddenly want to send their kids to this school. So I think what's going to end up happening there is they're probably going to open more schools to accommodate the influx of people.
Is that making the prices go higher or lower?
I think for the short term, it may make the costs go up a little bit, just as they try to build out infrastructure to accommodate. But look, I think the school there is probably a traditional out of town type, like out of town schools, not in communities where you have major grants from the government, but out of town schools can sometimes go a little, can approach like 5 towns type tuitions, like between $14,000 and $17,000 for out of town schools in places like Dallas and Atlanta. And again, I don't want to be held to each specific school, but these are just general things. And sometimes the reason for that is that an out-of-town school doesn't have as many people as an in-town school has. And so when you're dealing with a high school where you have 120 students, but you need a building and you need teachers and you need infrastructure and you need committees and you need, all of these things, your costs are going to be higher because you just have less kids to defray the cost.
I've heard Lakewood, even though it might be whatever the number is, 5,000 to 7,000, there is no forgiveness.
Right. So that's a very interesting model. And I've spoken to a lot of people in Lakewood about it, and it works for them. But ultimately in Lakewood, like you said, there's a lot of exceptions, or there are exceptions, but as a general rule, tuition is much lower than anywhere else. Class sizes are higher. They're not doing model model UNs, like Rabbi Glass said. If you want to get into Yale or Harvard, you have to prove that you went through model UN and you had a built out sports program and built out science labs of a certain caliber. And so in Lakewood, they don't have to do that.
Which I've learned is why it's considerably cheaper.
Correct. And plus they have more kids per class. They have perhaps a better supply of teachers because of the amount of people coming through the system and that are more readily available. So they have a better supply of teachers. And like you said, there isn't a lot of forgiveness. And it's hard to get into school in Lakewood. And they'll send tuition bills to parents, grandparents, uncles, cousins, and that's just the way it works, but it's cheaper than anywhere else. And so there's trade-offs to everything in life.
Right. I saw Darche and Yeshiva Katana in the 5 towns sent out a letter to parents stating that the food is going to be covered by the government or school meals, thereby saving parents, whatever it is, $1,500 over the course of the year. So government could, and Rebbe Glass spoke about this, that it could be a real way to solve a good chunk of the monies that people are paying out, where you look at Cincinnati, and I got stubs from people. They're like, yeah, you should move here, or you move there. Look how little I'm paying because the government is subsidizing. That could be a real solution. But what are your ideas to lower tuition?
Okay, so I have an idea. I'm going to put this out there, and if anybody's interested in following up, this is not I don't think this has originated with me. We looked at this 10 years ago, and we're looking at it again now. And if anybody sort of wants to discuss it, but the idea would be as follows, right? Tuition right now is not tax deductible, which presents a real problem for people who are having to make these payments out on post-tax on their incomes. So our idea was as follows. Let's say a tuition in a school is $12,000, okay? Our idea was you approach the parents who are paying full tuition, let's say it's 30, 40, 50% of a parent body, and say, listen, next year we're lowering tuition to $8,000. Tuition's going to be $8,000 next year. The other $4,000 is a voluntary payment to a synagogue fund, to a separate 501c3, and that $4,000 is going to be tax deductible, which for people who itemize on their taxes, they could potentially walk away with 30 to 40% of that money back. Now, it's complete. It has to, in order for this to be legal, it has to be completely voluntary, right? So $8,000 tuition now has gone down from 12 to 8. That extra $4,000, pay it or don't. If you pay it, it's tax deductible. If you don't pay it and you can afford to pay it, the next year tuition's right back up to $12,000. Meaning if you get buy-in from the parent body, where all the full tuition paying parents are going, listen, I'm anyways paying full tuition. I have a choice. I can either buy into the system, it's $8,000 plus $4,000, or I don't buy into the system. If I don't buy into the system, then we're right back to where we started. But if every parent buys into the system, guess what? Next year tuition could be $7,000. And then the delta's $5,000. Now I've got $5,000 coming back as a that I can itemize on my taxes. And I'll tell you what else is really interesting potentially about that idea. If you get 80, 90% of the parents bought in, and you'd have to have committees and you go visit the parents and you explain why it's important, and you get them to give you a credit card that will be charged once a month for the next 12 months to cover that delta. And if you have 80, 90% of the parents bought in, and right now we're looking at the potential of doing it in one community with one school. And not only that, the Balabatim in the community agreed to underwrite the risk to the school. So if the school says, I don't want to do that, what happens if we get 33% next year? Balabatim will underwrite the risk to the school for doing that. So suddenly, for half of the parent body, tuition now becomes a 33% of tuition is now tax deductible. But I'll tell you what else could potentially be beneficial on that is, there's parents who, let's say, can afford to pay, let's say full tuition is now $8,000 instead of 12 or 14. There are parents who can't afford to pay 12, and they can only afford to pay 7. But when tuition is 12, they're going to go to the tuition committee and go through the whole thing, and you have to show your tax returns and go through that whole process. If tuition's only $8,000, suddenly parents making 6 or 7 might just say, you know what, I'm going to pay 8 because I don't want to have to go through that. I'm not doing it. I'm not going through that. So, I think that has a potential to be
the next scene. Zevi's getting in a cop car, like being arrested for a Ponzi scheme. No, I'm kidding.
But on that note, someone wrote in a question: can the schools let us know exactly what it costs to educate a child so that the rest can come out of my miser?
So,
right? If it is, let's say, $8,000, then they know that it could be charity dollars
Yeah.
that's allocated towards to fill the gap.
Yeah, and that was, I mean, that comment is one of a whole bunch of comments that we got expressing frustration with the schools, that they feel like they don't know what the school's budgets are. And because they don't know what the school's budget is, they feel frustrated. They feel like they're not being let in, and they're paying a lot of money, but they don't feel like they're real partners with the school. And I think one of the episodes that we want to do in the next season is an episode where we can get a school to agree to come on. So if you're an executive director at a school or a chairman of the board at a school, and you'd be willing to come on to Kosher Money and talk about it and answer questions that parents have. And in fairness, I think a lot of the questions that parents have and are frustrated with have good answers. Mm-hmm. Like parents will say, well, it's not fair. In Lakewood, they're paying $6,000, but in Far Rockaway, I'm paying $16,000. The Far Rockaway school should go and learn. It's not the same, right? And there's a really good answer to that question. But the problem is that parents feel like they're not getting answers.
A lot of people do think, I'm not in tuition world yet, Rich, but a lot of people do think that like the schools are getting rich off it, and like people really think that. We got a bunch of feedback like that, like people angry at the schools.
And we spoke with one fundraiser at a school who, there's a few of him at that school, and the reason they exist is because the school has a budget, let's say, I'll make up a number, of $1 million, and tuition only covers $700,000, and they have to fill the gap with community-raised funds.
Right.
And he says a lot of the things, and like you said, a lot of the questions could be answered. There are real answers.
Yeah.
There's real insight. Now, not everything is perfect, he said. He told me, he goes, obviously sometimes, when I'm buying paper, are we spending as much time as we could to find the best deal on the paper so that thereby we can bring the cost down? Or when we're paying electric, if we were to use a different provider, he's like, you're right. If we were Ma'ayin and we look deep into it, I'm sure there are ways we can save money. But he says the budget that they have isn't so far off from where it needs to be. But like you said, Zevi, and I know you have a lot to say on this, people want to see that. They want to know that this is the budget, this is how much we're paying, these are the costs, this is how much we have left. They want to see that.
100%. And I'll make the question. Let's not make it about paper and electricity.
Okay.
Let's make the question like somebody when you sort of gave that feedback to somebody who sent you a voice note, they sent back what I think is a very interesting point. And I'm not commenting. I don't have any comment on this, but they said, okay, fine. Let's agree. Let's stipulate that the school's budgets are that nobody's getting rich. Mm-hmm. And the school's budget is reasonable, and that the reason why we're paying is because we're getting a service, and all of that's true. Let's say the school decides that they have to go make a massive expenditure to build a new wing, a new building, a new base medrash, a new whatever it is, right? And not all of it is going to be donated. But they're putting up a $5 million wing. Guess what? Tuition's going to go up because by definition it has to go up. Mm-hmm. We have to make the payments.
Why should that be on?
Do parents get a say in whether or not the school makes a decision that's going to cause their tuition to go from 15 to 18? Do parents get a say in that? And I have no idea what the answer is. But in other words, these are the things that we would love to have schools come on and address these issues. And I'll tell you something else which is just interesting. Somebody once asked Rav Pam, and I remembered this in between episodes. Somebody asked Rav Pam, do you get to charge my kid tuition X to offset the cost of people who are not paying full tuition? Right? And this is a question you asked Rabbi Glass. And they asked that to Rav Pam. And Rav Pam says yes, and he said a very interesting reason why. He said because of, in Yiddish, or I don't know what language, he says chavraya, right? Maybe it's, I don't know. So chavraya. What does chavraya mean? It means that sometimes the kids who are not able to pay full tuition, who are those kids? It's the Rebbeim's kids, the Rabbanim's kids. You need those kids in the school. Mm-hmm. You need these kids in the school. And they add having Rebbeim and Rabbanim's kids in the school adds a tremendous value to the ruchnius and the spirituality of the school. So yeah, you should be paying to have those kids in your in the school. So somebody I know who heard that said, well, wait a second, that's great. So if I'm paying for the Rebbeim's kids, do I get to choose whether or not to have my kids in the Rebbeim's kids class? Or if I'm Chevraya, I'm paying for Chevraya. I want my kids with that Chevra. So it's an interesting question. I don't think it's a simple answer, but it's an interesting question if that's the perspective on why you get to do that.
You mentioned looking into a parent's finances so that they're deemed to be eligible for financial aid. Someone wrote in that perhaps families should have to take some sort of interest-free loan to pay for whatever is missing in that scholarship or in their tuition statements. Because if you have other parents covering the cost of those families, there's no responsibility, or there's no, and this is just a thought. We got so many different pieces,
Yeah.
but they're like, why are we paying for something that is not relevant to my child? And you just answer from Ref Pam, but
No. So there's a very fundamental machlokas when it comes to tuition. I've heard this from Rabbi Hauer many times, and I know how Rabbi Hauer feels about that particular issue. And it has multiple ramifications. And the machlokas is as follows. Right, the idea of the school system came from Rabbi Shua ben Gamla, who determined that it wasn't viable to have fathers educating their children. We needed to be the community's responsibility. Okay? Everybody agrees that there needs to be tuition because otherwise the system couldn't function. But fundamentally, when it comes down to it, a parent has to pay the most that they can, however you define what the most that they can is. But after that point, can a school give a parent an IOU and say, whenever in life you finish paying tuition for the rest of your kids and you're in retirement now, come back and make the rest of it up to us? Or fundamentally, is it the community's responsibility? When it comes down to it, bottom line, when there's a shortfall, whose achrayus is it? Is it the community's achrayus? Or no, it costs $12,000 to educate your kid. You don't get to tell the electricity company, I'm sorry, listen, I know my bill is $1,500 this month. All I can afford is $800. I'm really sorry about that. Here's my tax return if you don't believe me. Whose achrayus is it? Is it the parents' achrayus, bottom line, or is it the community's achrayus? And there's a lot of ramifications to that, including whether is a school allowed to give an IOU to a parent. Is a school allowed to say, okay, but you owe us the rest of it? I know Rabbi Hauer believes the answer is no. Mm-hmm. Fundamentally, it's the community's responsibility. Parents have to do the best they can. Yes. Does there need to be a tuition committee? Sure. But at the end of the day, community's responsibility. Rabbi Shua ben Gamla, this is the way we set it up. It's the community's achrayus, like Rabbi Glass said also. You have a mikvah, you have a thing, right? You have shuls, you have a mikvah, you have it. You have to make sure that kids can get a Jewish education.
I saw someone during COVID that they told the school they weren't able to afford whatever tuition was or whatever they agreed to. And they said to him, I saw the letter, it said from this particular school, it said that the student will be allowed back into the school once they agree that at some point they'll get the money that is owed to them.
Yeah, so that's this
issue.
That's
the struggle. Two more on the tuition/schools. I thought it was interesting, and we'll get into the budgeting.
It's becoming the tuition recap.
Yeah, no, it was a big piece. A lot of I know I'm going to get a ton of feedback.
Sure.
The email address. You get a lot of emails, Avi?
Yeah. So honestly, like we said, Living Smarter Jewish has really reformulated a lot of what we focused on based on this, and it's because like you kept giving out the email address, so thank you for that. info@livingsmarterjewish.org. And people have been emailing us. I would say we get about 10 emails a day.
Wow.
100% from the podcast. Like
Wow.
we just went out, Jewish Action, like we just came out, and there's a lot about Living Smarter Jewish in there. So now we're getting a lot of on that. But up until now, it's been like we weren't ready to launch as an organization until
Right.
October 1st. And I figured, okay, fine, we launched the podcast, right? How many you said dozens of people were going to
Yes.
listen to it.
Yeah.
I heard you say dozens.
That is correct.
Okay, so dozens of people are going to listen to it. So then fine, we'll deal with
We'll
dozens
get
of people.
the website up when the website's up. I was
Yeah,
pushing
that's it.
people to the website. People were like, the website's just a landing page
that's
now.
right.
I'm like, oh, really? I guess they...
And it's still just a landing page because we were not ready for 100,000 people to listen to a podcast. And the answer is this topic really, really touched people.
So we had 2 episodes on budgeting, and we'll discuss why. But one, while we're still discussing the schools, people had submitted this idea, a couple of people, where maybe we can ask the schools, Litoelis, to encourage people who may not be making ends meet to go to the budgeting sessions. Very similar to how Yoel Bodek said he would love for the schools to encourage people to get life insurance, not force them, but it's another way where a school, if they want their parent body to be fiscally responsible, at the end of that meeting, they go, hey, by the way, after this conversation, we think that you should probably speak to so-and-so about life insurance, and also maybe sit with a Stacy or a Simi and have a conversation about budgeting. We think that you'll be able to breathe a little bit easier. So I thought that was interesting. And there was,
Sorry.
Go ahead.
No,
You're allowed
this is it's a very interesting one because I will tell you, when we were running the organization in Baltimore for the last number of years, we found the least effective the least effective cases that we worked with in personal finance, the least effective were the ones where they had to come. So like an Ahavas Yisrael or a Tomchei Shabbos would say, you want money from us? You want food boxes on Friday? Go sit with them and get your budget in order. People are coming because they need the food boxes. They're not coming because they want to get their budget in order. In order to get your budget to in order and whatever, what's been learned from all of these years is that people have to be motivated and they have to want to. And for whatever reason, it could be one of 100 reasons, but the least effective is when people are forced to come.
Interesting. So maybe encouraged or lightly /
value,
strongly.
yeah,
Right.
Exactly.
One other idea on the schools is someone submitted this idea of similar to adopt a kollel, adopt a yeshiva, where let's say 5% of a school's budget is the back office, where you have these successful accounting firms or these successful businesses that have the internal wherewithal to manage an institution's back office, and it wouldn't be at much cost to them. You can help alleviate that, where this adopt a yeshiva, I thought that was pretty interesting.
Does Harvesting Media want to do marketing for
No,
Yeshiva Kadana?
no. We're specifically focused on the food industry.
We'll talk about the.
Well, I think the food
the
industry
lunch.
has a lot more to yeshivas to do with yeshivas now.
That
than
is
it did.
true. That is true. We can have a separate conversation about that. We had two budgeters on in season one. And they were both great. Simi Mandelbaum, and we also had Stacey Zrian from Achiezer. People ask us questions, Evie, right? The three producers of the podcast are sitting right here. Why have two budgeters? Why didn't you have two life insurance brokers that discuss this?
Right. No, and both episodes got a lot of positive feedback. I will say that before we answer that question, one of the interesting things that happened was the people who came on and actually provide a service, like as part of what they do, have been overwhelmed by demand, and that's Simi. I think she said she has 50 people waiting waiting for her, which she's going to refer a lot of them hopefully to us, to Living Smarter Jews. She doesn't have the capacity. Ned Schoenfeld came on. He told me he has a call jobs and Parnassa and how people can find good jobs. I think he said he has 40 people waiting to talk to him now since the episode. And hopefully Stacey as well. It was more recent, so I haven't spoken to her, but hopefully Stacey as well. And so to answer your question, I think Simi and Stacey have different approaches to budgeting, although I think they would both agree with each other's, what the emphasis that each of the other one placed, but they have different approaches to budgeting. Simi's approach is she's a financial therapist. I think that's what that's what it's called. Is that right?
Yeah, certified financial therapist.
Certified financial
one
therapist.
One of only 300 in the U.S.
And
that is from.
The only Orthodox one that's from. Right.
Yeah,
The only one that's Orthodox.
True.
Yeah. So her perspective on it really starts with it's a mindset, right? Budgeting, money. It's this same way that a therapist would approach an issue. It comes down to mindset, and it comes down to what your approach to finances is. And then the budgeting, it needs to get done and you need to get into it. But at the end of the day, you've got to be coming at it from the right place. And this is what we were saying before. Somebody's forced to go into a budgeting thing. It's not going to work.
The emotions have to be right.
Exactly. The emotions have to be right. And what's your attitude towards spending? And what was your attitude as a kid and growing up? And what are the bad habits that you develop? And how can we help you develop good habits? Right, that's like her core focus and where she's coming from. And then she talked about all these different budgeting apps to use, and she has her own budgeting spreadsheets. Stacey, I think, really comes at it from a much more, I would say, black and white. Let's sit down together and figure out where's all that money going, and let's go line by line, figure out where the money's going, understand thing, and that really, Naftali Horowitz mentioned it in his episode also a little bit, like every dollar that you spend here, you're going to get less over there, and you're borrowing from your future, and that's really, I think, Stacey's really coming at it from that, and Baruch Hashem, we got great feedback on both of them, but I think both are equally important.
I actually sat with Stacey. Yaakov went with his wife as well, and she'll really only meet, unless in severe circumstances, the couple at the same time. And we literally went through it. I did a little homework before so I can get how much I'm paying life insurance annually, health insurance, dental insurance. And there were 4 or 5 solid takeaways to save potentially thousands of dollars a month. She said, she goes, let me see your water bill. Okay. She's like, $300 a month the past 3 months. She said, that's something wrong there. She's like, do you have a smart sprinkler? I go, what? She goes, yeah. Your sprinkler won't go on if it's raining outside. I said, no. She's like, not only that, the Long Island American Water will subsidize it. 2 days later, I went on the website. For $100, I got a smart sprinkler, and that money will be saved in a few months. knowing that it's not going to rain, so the sprinkler should. It's going to rain, so the sprinkler's not going to go on.
Yeah,
What
Yeah.
was your experience?
So, apologies for my voice. I was just davening very haliga during Rosh Hashanah. No, I have a virus. Not COVID. But with me,
You just had a separate podcast right there. You just
my
spit
takeaway
off.
was it was incredible. First of all, it's budgeting. I think just that word it makes a lot of people anxious. So I definitely didn't want to do it. But once you do it, it's like after you have such clarity. For us, we had so much of our accounts. We had so many accounts. I don't know why, but I had $1,000 there and $2,000 there. She's like, "Why do you have so many accounts?" I'm like, "Well, it's a separate business." And then over there, she's like, "It's separate business." And I was like, "No separate business." But she basically was saying,
He has
like,
conversations with himself. You notice that?
she basically
Yeah.
was saying that like, no, just get all your money in one place. And it's like since my wife and I were like, just that to know, like we didn't, she's like, "How much money do you have?" I'm like, "I have no clue." She's like, "How do you not know?" Like around, I'm like, "I don't even know." And like just to give that clarity was so helpful for us. And even since then, we've been like spending our money more wisely.
Wisely.
We're spending our money more wisely.
It's a good thing you have health insurance sounding like
Yeah.
that. She also said, I'm spending too much on health insurance. She said, you have a great plan, but do you need that? Which I thought was pretty interesting. I have a whole life insurance policy, which she said, you get rid of that. She wants me to get rid of it. I have to talk to my insurance broker.
He's not going to be happy with you.
He's not, but these are the things that no one else either knows or has a conversation with you
Right.
about, which was very insightful.
Right.
You know, how much we're spending on groceries, eating out. You know, we don't necessarily go to restaurants.
Are you going to share how much you spend on groceries here?
I think it was over $500 a week.
Okay.
And she said, you know, based on a family your size, you probably could
I was
save
also
$100
agree with
a
her,
week.
that she was able to say like, "Hey, I sat down with hundreds of thousands of people, like, and you fall into over here." Like she has, you always want to know, like, "Oh, am I spend like I said with the grocery, like for my family, does this make sense?" And like we always ask this question, you don't know the answer. She's
Right.
able to say like, "Hey, from my experience, I'm not a what do I know, but from my experience, you should be over here based on this income and based on the amount of people that I've seen," which is also really great.
She said that in terms of retirement, she showed where the money would be in 20, 30 years from now. And she said, that's good. She's like, but the problem is you don't have an emergency fund.
Right.
And she said, I don't want you to keep putting money into your retirement. I want you to be able to have 3 to 6 months of your income put away into, which I thought was super insightful. And I wouldn't have had that information. We're going to try to start doing that. Subscriptions, that was a big one where...
Yeah, you made a big thing on that.
Yeah,
Can you just talk about
Yeah,
that for
sure.
a second?
So I put on my status, my WhatsApp status. It's read by dozens of people. And
It's not dozens.
And there's this app called Truebill, which will you connect your accounts. It's safe, so they say, and it will go through all of your bank statements, your credit card statements, and show you where your recurring bills are. And I had people reach out to me and say, "You just saved me $105 a month. That's $1,300 a year."
Yeah.
I go, "What were you spending the money on?" He says, "My wife accidentally checked off a box on justfab.com where every month she gets $40 put into the JustFab account to spend money on shoes." She's like, she never ordered shoes after that one time. And B, I realized like I had $1,500 in justfab.com. He's like, I called the company up. They say, "Oh, okay, yeah, we'll return the money to you."
Amazing.
People are spending money because they don't even know they have these subscriptions.
JustFab hates kosher money.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
They are not a sponsor of us, but Truebill should be. And Truebill, it's free for 7 days. You can go if you don't want to continue using it. I think it's like $3 a month. It's a subscription.
That's so ironic.
Yeah, it's like very interesting. But that was a real way that people can save money because they don't realize they're spending $14 a month. Oh, one guy who reached out to me, he had 2 Amazon Prime accounts. He was paying. He's like, I never knew.
orders a lot of
He's
stuff.
like, I don't get it. He's like, I don't get the items any faster.
No.
Right. So he cut out one of his Prime. There were so many different stories. So by the time I got to Stacy, she's like, "You really don't have too many subscriptions." I'm like, yeah. And I made up with her that I'm going to meet her with my wife again in 6 months to see
Beautiful.
where we're holding. So, and it was free of charge. I think there's this stigma associated with a chesed organization. In this case, it's Achiezer that does great work where, oh, you're going to meet with a financial advisor, you must have real problems. Whether someone has real problems or not, it doesn't make a difference.
No.
She can help you.
Yeah,
Which I
100%.
thought was pretty amazing. And we'll see over time how many people do reach out, but highly recommend you take her up on the offer. Let's talk about Parnassah on Rosh Hashanah. I know it came up quickly, and we're going all over the place. That's
Yes.
the point of the recap. If everything is decided upon Rosh Hashanah, how does the Shtadlis during the year play a role?
Right. So I'm not a Rav, and by rights shouldn't be getting this question, but we did get the question a lot after Rabbi Hauer's episode, which he dealt a lot with Emun and B'tachon, and I think people said that one of the things that they struggled with the most is if Parnasas Shalom K'tzuvim Lami Rosh Hashanah ad Rosh Hashanah, so then what are we all doing here? Right. So an answer that I heard once, I think I actually heard it, I'm trying to remember where I heard it, I don't remember, was that the Rebbeinu Shalom puts a certain amount of shefa, meaning a certain amount of opportunity into the world for a person. And then there's a lot of bechira that's associated with that. In other words, a person has to make reasonable hishtadlus, but there's also amounts that a person, right? I think everybody understands the idea that if it's raining outside and you go out with a cup, you're going to get a certain amount of water. If you go out with a bucket, you're going to get more. And if you go out with a bathtub, you're going to get more. And there's a certain amount of shefa that's put in the world. And a person, if a person chooses to take a lower paying job, that's bechira. And it could be that that's the right thing for him. Like Rabbi Hauer said, people, they move out of town. It's, they don't make as much money, but they don't have as much expectation. And it could be that they're much happier by doing that. But if a person wants to work more hours and put in more to a reasonable extent, then they have the ability to go out and access more and access more of that chef up to a certain limit. Obviously, it's not limitless, and I'm not a Rav. And ask your local Orthodox rabbi what's appropriate for each person. But I think that's the answer that I heard that I sort of makes the most sense to me. And the two words that I personally live with like every day when I think about this question is reasonable hishtadlus. The Rebbeinu Shalom expects reasonable hishtadlus. What's reasonable? It's different for every person.
Another area where I think an episode that made a real dent was life insurance.
Yep.
People went out to take out policies, even just having a conversation with their neighbor who sells life insurance and said, hey, do I have enough life insurance? I was very, very happy to see that there was so much discussion around it. But one of the things we didn't cover, regretfully so, is how much life insurance someone should take out. And we spoke with Reb Yoel Bodek before this episode.
Is he Reb?
He is to me. He's my Rebbe. He's my life insurance Rebbe. He's super insightful, always willing to help. And he said, and there was like this sliding scale, like if you have one kid, people say anywhere from $500,000 to $1 million per child is the policy you should take out. But he had an interesting way of putting it. He says there's different ways to look at it, but the most basic way is that people should get a policy that's 20 times their living expenses. So if their annual costs are $100,000, they should have $2.4 million in coverage. He says that $1 million in the bank can be spent very quickly, a lot quicker than people can think. But with 20X, you can allow a family to live their lifestyle within their means. They don't have to cut back. There wouldn't be any hindrance. He says you take that money, the 2.4 million, you can set up a fund where back in the day, maybe you would get 5% interest and you'd be able to live off of that interest. He says in today's landscape, it's a little bit harder with the lower interest earned. He spoke about, and you can listen to that episode, about stacking coverage,
Right.
different ways. But he didn't go so much in the per child. His answer wasn't in the per child, which Albert Kahn, who was that fellow who runs around and made it his life mission to get people, I think he said, and if I'm quoting you wrong, he will call me, I think it was 500,000 minimum per child. It might have been $1 million. Some say that. But Yoel Bodek said it was 20X people's
Living expenses.
which was
Yep.
kind of interesting and insightful. One thing we did not cover is people, when they heard the investment episode, they said, okay, so it's guaranteed. Like, I'm going to make the money if I put the money in the S&P 500. And someone reached out and was like, you didn't really cover risk, right? Ask people who invested in 2007 if they strongly believe that it's a guarantee. The last 10 years, the stock market's been climbing and climbing. But I do think we should have Reb Naftali Horowitz back on to cover risk and how to set up an IRA. People are chalishing for that. Zevi, what are you doing on the video side of things?
Yes. So when we talked about sort of reformulating our priorities, so after Naftali's episode and after Simi's episode, people were like, well, wait a second, that was a great 45 minutes to an hour, but I need a lot more. information. And so we are at Living Smarter Jewish. We actually had Naftali in he sat down for like 2.5 hours and just talked about the basics and what you need to know and what a bar mitzvah boy should do with his money and what's the chassan and kala, how they should approach investing and things like that. And we're hopefully going to be making that available, hopefully in conjunction with Kosher Money. And we're really excited to put that out. Now, it's not like podcast type material necessarily. It's not like, okay, family listening, let's talk about the difference between ETFs and hedge funds. And, it's a little bit less exciting and it's a little, not so controversial. But it's really important, and we feel like that information needs to be out there. We're trying to make it as entertaining as possible and as easy to view and to listen to as possible.
I had a ton of requests. People said, we love their Naftali Horowitz episode, but I don't know how to set up an IRA.
You know what's fascinating about that is that if you type into YouTube how to set up an IRA, you'll probably get 150,000 responses, more, maybe 1 million, but that's the problem. In other words, people feel overwhelmed by the sheer amount of information that's out there, not knowing how to cull that information and isolate what they should be looking at. And that's why it's like, okay, I feel comfortable that I trust you guys, Naftali Horowitz, whoever it is, just let him tell me what to do. And then that's how I'm going to do it. A good friend of mine whose financial advice I trust and it made a fantastic suggestion to me, and it's not the time or place for this particular, but for those of you who could potentially benefit from in putting investments in that are perhaps more risky and having it grow completely tax-free over a long period of time. Strongly recommend looking into that. Speak to people that you trust. Very, very highly recommend. Something I just didn't know, but came out as part of these conversations.
Young married couples.
Yeah.
I know Living Smarter Jewish, and I think a few different guests mentioned it, where if we start early enough, we can help people. Stacy, in particular, we can help people avoid problems. What's Living Smarter Jewish doing to help these young married couples?
Young people. So before we get to young married couples, let's start with kids, because really important. So a lot of people were saying, I wish I would have learned this in school, and I wish I would have known. So what we're doing is, since the first podcast, we've developed 2 curricula for 11th and 12th grade, girls and boys. We're making them available completely free of charge. And we put that out in the Jewish Action. I think we're up to 15 or 20 schools that we're putting financial literacy education.
Can adults take it? I'm serious.
So it's not a joke. I when I was looking at the table of contents, I'm like, okay, I need to read this.
Right.
It was really interesting. And there's one that's less sophisticated for people who for kids who really may not be ready, who need a real 101 course. And there's one that's much more sophisticated. So that's available. Any high school yeshiva, please feel free to reach out. info@livingsmarterjewish.org. Those are free. Second thing is, you talked about young couples. So one of the things, like you said, Stacy and Naftali and everybody said, it's so important if people get started like what you guys doing. You're both young, and you get started young.
Savvy's like a year older than me, by the way.
I'm trying here. And you get started young, and you put your you get your budget in order. At a relatively young age, you start investing at a relatively young age. You really mitigate a ton of the problems that people are showing up in their 50s and 60s with challenges that are much harder to resolve at that point. Of course, it's all siyata d'shmaya, and things, of course, can be done. But so what we're trying to do is we're really approaching young couples as a massive target for this. And it's really amazing. So somebody listened to the podcast from Cleveland. He's like, I know a guy in Milwaukee you need to talk to. Sure. Puts me in touch with a guy from Milwaukee. And I'm speaking to the guy, and I said, so what do you do? He says, I've been a financial advisor since 1986. Great. So why are we talking? David said, I need to talk to you. Why are we talking? He says, well, the truth is, he says, what I've been doing is Meiser Zman, which basically means giving 10% of your time. He's like, I spent 4 hours a week with young couples in Milwaukee. Every young couple that gets married in Milwaukee, or more or less, I sit with them for an hour and a half, and I set up their bank accounts, and I set up a Meiser account, and I set up an IRA, and we go through a budget, and I explain to them the basics that they need to know. I give them my cell phone number, and I say, call me and text me in 6 months. He's like, used to be people would call me. Nobody calls me anymore. Everybody texts me. Fine. So he says, I've gotten very good with text. He said, text me in 6 months. Let me know how you're doing. Text me in a year. He says, I've got people that are 5-10 years down the road now, and they've been in touch with me. They're like, I'm following the budget that we sent. Whatever. I said, Jay, that's amazing. I said, but you're not replicable, right? I can't have you. But I said, would you train other financial advisors to be able to do what you do and sit with young couples and go through and help them set up their accounts while they're sitting with you. I said 100%. So I think we're at like 5 or 6 advisors. We're training Mr. Shem. It's going to be a relatively short training. He has all the materials already done, and they obviously all know what they're talking about already. Training them to hopefully make it available to Chassanim and Kalas free of charge throughout, like any Chassan and Kala Klal Yisrael, now that we can do things remotely, especially. And our goal is that hopefully over time we can train enough people that every Chassan and Kala goes through this as part of their Chassan Kala training.
Yeah, I love it. Like Chassan Kalas, they go to a Chassan Kala teacher because, hey, you're about to get married, and yet these are certain things you need to discuss. And me personally, I mean, we did discuss the finances, but like very limited. It was like a 10-minute conversation.
Right.
I love that you're creating this program to really set these couples up. What if someone's 35 and they want to go through this? Or will there...
So he says that his program is most effective for people in Shana Rishona. He doesn't talk to people after Shana Rishona. But Living Smarter Jewish does have, I think, just also from the podcast, by the way, it's unbelievable. People just email us and say, can I volunteer? I'm an accountant. I want to volunteer. We're up to 90 coaches already that have volunteered to work with people free of charge, like Stacy. And we are going to be doing our final training after Sukkot 2021. And hopefully this will be available. We already have 15 counselors ready to go now, but hopefully it will be available to anybody beginning after Sukkot.
That's awesome. I had friends reach out and say, hey, how can I get involved? I say, info@livingsmarterjewish.org.
There you go.
My wife's like, hey, can you help me with the take out the garbage? I say, info@livingsmarterjewish.org. I just use the email address for everything. So let's quickly talk before we end the recap. Let's talk about season 2.
Yeah.
We had a ton of people submit podcast ideas. People said, hey, they want help with their business, which we did an amazing episode recorded with the dean of YU's business school, which is going to drop in season 2. We had people say, hey, I want you to interview someone about how money affects marriage. Have a marriage therapist on. Hey, I'm a single person. I have a lot of friends. We're in our 20s. What should we do with our money? Should we be doing something different than couples? How should we invest it? Hey, can you have a grocery owner on to talk about if they have people put money on their groceries on account and why? Can we talk about that? Have someone talk about Meiser. I think we're going to do an entire episode on Meiser and
Related halachas.
halacha, and also just practical tips. Someone told me that he went into the bank to set up the bank account, and he's like, the non-Jew behind the counter said, oh, let me guess, you're going to also have an account called Maser? He goes, yeah, why, do you see a lot of that? He goes, yeah, people automate it that whenever money goes into a specific account, 10% of that goes to the other account.
I have that, and I also have a debit card just for it. So anytime a tzedakah organization, like they want some money, great, I have a specific card that I know
Perfect.
all that money's for sure for them, and don't have to get, it's so
Amazing.
confusing otherwise.
Yeah.
We wanted to do an episode during COVID. It's a little bit harder, but buying a car versus leasing a car. Right now, the entire market is upended because supply chain, chips, and all that. So it's not the right time. But we're also going to do an episode on buying a home.
Yeah. I think that's really important.
Oh.
I think that was one of the interesting things for me just in general was, you talk about tuition being the point of contention in the whole from budgeting thing. Housing prices, obviously we know about it, but in other words, it's something that just people feel so strongly about, like how much they're paying in their mortgage and what type of house and how to keep up and what type of neighborhoods. And this has really been the source of a lot of comments.
Some of our guests were submitted via the WhatsApp. And Yaakov, you can pull up the phone number for it. But
I don't remember.
I think I do. I just don't want to get it wrong. 914-222-5513. Nailed it. But if people have suggestions for topics, guest ideas, we want to have that. Zevi and I, we spoke with someone last week.
Yeah, really excited to have him on. It was great. Should we say who it is?
Yeah, you can go.
Tzvi Piratinsky, from Lakewood. So we're really excited to have him on.
Yes, that's Living L'Chaim. Submit your ideas. You can email them to info@livingsmarterjewish.org or Living L'Chaim at 914-222-5513.
We also have on the website, people can submit guest ideas.
Guest ideas on the website through the form there. We have an Instagram account, Living L'Chaim. YouTube has been popping. People don't want to listen to the podcast. They said they need to see the episodes, so they're available. They can do both. Yeah, we really have like 3 listeners, and they listen 77,000 times.
I don't know if it's a season 2 thing, but the idea to like this, it's everything about money. So right now, like we're trying to lay down the foundations of like, okay, like our goal is to help people live an easier life in relations to money. So right now, it's the I guess the training wheels kind of, and we're getting a little more nitty gritty in season 2. But I get
Right.
it's season 3 or 4. I don't know. Foresee like talking to people who have made it and talking to them about like these successful businessmen.
Sure.
Not necessarily only Yidden, other just people who've made it, well in finances and have a healthy outlook at life. Obviously, we wouldn't have someone who's like, just
No, there's a lot to that. I think there's, first of all, in the business side, oh my goodness. I mean, it's literally endless in terms of the value I think that could be brought to the table with some business focused episodes. And I think a lot of people in our community are going into business, certainly at a higher percentage than the average in the United States. And I think, having a real strong parallel business focused series of episodes is certainly valuable.
Yeah, it's going to be great. We spoke about with Ned about mentors and how that can help expedite. I love the nugget where as much as these gemachs help people with giving them money, they also help them by not giving them money.
Right.
To help them avoid a business where they would end up being $50,000, $75,000 in debt. There's so much here. I'm very excited to cover it. We're going to work on Dave Ramsey for season 9. I'll try to get him on there.
It's a shame.
But Zev, you came down all the way from Baltimore. We truly appreciate it. Thank you so much for everything you do behind the scenes. Yaakov as well. Excited about to see Living L'Chaim grow, Living Smarter Jewish grow, and Kosher Money, helping people with their personal finances.
Listen, you guys are amazing. It's really been it's been a pleasure getting to know you over the last few months. You guys are absolute powerhouses, and really this is growing on both of your backs.
I concur.
So
No, okay. Thanks so much for coming down.
take care.
Take care.
This podcast has been hosted by my brother, Eli Langer, produced by me, Yaakov Langer, and brought to you by Living L'Chaim. To check out other podcasts from Living L'Chaim, go to livingl'chaim.com. Check out our YouTube channel. Check up Living L'Chaim on podcasts and do your thing. Until next time, enjoy life. Living L'Chaim.